Dr. Harr's run-in with security guards summoned by Senator Valerie Foushee marked his third such encounter in little more than a decade. All cases were unjustified and motivated by malice. The first incident, which occurred in April 2010, was by far the most terrifying and carried possible life-threatening consequences. The second instance took place in the nation's capital on Capitol Hill, courtesy of Tar Heelian congressional officials and/or their staff. Fortunately, Harr managed to escape unscathed and without arrest in the first occurrence, but not without likely divine intervention in the April 14, 2010 incident at the Duke University Law School building. Known at the law school building as a highly visible supporter of Mike Nifong, the Durham district attorney who was disbarred for his handling of the infamous 2006 Duke Lacrosse case, Harr had been attending events at the law school building and visiting there approximately 2 years prior, customarily wearing his Justice for Nifong t-shirt. Unfortunately, on April 12th, 2 days prior to the fateful event, Harr wrote complimentary letters to Duke President Richard Brodhead and Duke Law School Dean David Levy, expressing how much he enjoyed the programs presented at the law school building that were open to the public. And he gave them both notice of his intention of attending the advertised interview with U.S. Justice Stephen Breyer to take place on the 14th. On April 14, 2010, an unsuspecting Harr arrived early by bus at the Duke University venue wearing his Nifong t-shirt, and once the event began, he acted as others similarly situated, taking photos with his camera and recording the interview with his audio recorder. The interview abruptly ended an hour later with Justice Breyer and his interviewers exiting the large lecture hall's stage by a rear stage door. Harr, with the standing room only attendees, exited en masse by 2 lobby doors. As Harr left the auditorium, he was approached by a man who identified himself as an Associated Press reporter, Tom Breen. He asked Harr for his opinion on the Breyer interview. As Harr responded, he noticed a uniformed security guard standing about 20 feet away, an unusual sight in the building which Harr attributed to the importance of the visiting judicial guest. Following his positive review of the interview, Harr told the reporter about his grassroots organization, the Committee on Justice for Mike Nifong, and the two exchanged business cards. Once the reporter left, Harr headed for the building's nearest exit with the intent of leaving for his Raleigh home when the security guard intercepted him and told him that he had to leave the Duke University property. Harr was stunned by the command from the security, and as the two made their way through the crowded lobby to the law school's building's exit, he tried to understand why he was being treated disrespectfully. Duke law professor James Coleman was navigating his way through the lobby when Harr, who had befriended him years earlier, called him over to explain what he thought to be a minor crisis. At this time, Harr retrieved his audio recorder and began to audio record the conversation with the guard.
Okay, tell me that again.
I've done explain to you everything I'm going to explain.
Mr. Harris, please tell me why you're kicking me off the...
Because you've been asked to by the building manager.
Why? The building manager. Why don't you?
The guard could not give a reason for forcing Harr off Duke property, other than stating that the building manager demanded it, but he would not allow Harr to meet with the building manager. Professor Coleman vigorously interceded on Harr's behalf and was vouching for him as the trio exited the building, while at the same time a Duke University campus police patrol car pulled up to the curb with an imposing uniformed officer disembarking. The security officer confided to Professor Coleman that he had been directed to have Harr removed from Duke University property and that he was merely following orders.
He's
Okay, I'm just, like I say, I'm just doing my job, okay? I was asked.
Okay,
That's
yeah,
what I'm saying.
thanks.
All right. Your name was?
In a rush to catch a flight, Professor Coleman negotiated a settlement of sorts with the security officer, who then conversed with the campus policeman. Security repeatedly warned Harr that he was nearly arrested, but could not express Harr's provocative action to justify arrest by campus police.
What problem did I cause?
You caused the problem in there, causing disturbance.
You're the ones that caused disturbance, not me.
Okay, well, you were almost arrested there, so.
For what?
I've done explained to you for trespass.
The security officer and campus police followed Harr against his wishes and flagged down a city bus, which the Niphon supporters ordered for a trip to the Durham Transit Station, from whence Harr took a bus to his apartment in Raleigh, relieved not to be in police custody. This April 14, 2010, security guard encounter differed from the others too, in that it was premeditated with knowledge beforehand of Harr's letters divulging his plans to attend the event open to the public. Almost 3 years later, on April 25, 2013, Harr had traveled to Washington, D.C. to personally hand out packets about Crystal Mangum's predicament to North Carolina congresspeople. She had been released on bail 2 months earlier and would go to trial 7 months later, charged with murder in her boyfriend's death. Harr was subjected to hostility and abuse as he went from one North Carolina congressional office to another, hoping for a meeting, but realistically accomplishing at the most the delivery of his unwanted packets, advocating for the dismissal of the case against Crystal Mangum. Though Harr never met with a congressperson, he was confronted by many of their congressional assistants, one or two refusing to accept hand delivery of the packets. Most assistants were politely dismissive of Harr's efforts, with several expressing contempt. It is from the latter group that Harr believes security guards were sent in pursuit of the slovenly dressed black man wearing a Justice for Niphon t-shirt. Harr was going from one office to the next when he was suddenly surrounded in a stairwell by a half-dozen unarmed security guards who were slightly hyperventilating. As in the General Assembly, Harr's state ID card was confiscated and run through numerous criminal and terrorist checklists before finally being returned to him, Harr being detained for approximately a half hour. After clearing him for any outstanding warrants, Dr. Harr's ID card was returned and he was allowed to continue delivering the remaining packets still in his possession. The interaction with security officers in the congressional building made this trip to Washington, D.C. one that Harr would never forget. Harr was anxious to return home to North Carolina.
Can't you see the sunshine? Well, can't you just feel the moonshine? And ain't it just like a friend of mine to hit me from behind?
The security officer at Duke University was involved in a devious and potentially deadly criminal plot when he was sent to ensnare Harr for the purpose of turning him over to the Duke University campus police. The likely culprit on Capitol Hill that sounded the alarm to security did so not out of perceived danger or threat. He or she did so out of annoyance at Dr. Harr, knowing they could get away with it because he was a black man not attired in a business suit. Clearly, this was an abuse of the security emergency response system. Senator Foushee, like all other Tar Heelian legislators, with the exception of Representative Mr. Shelley Willingham, do not want to be confronted by the egregious injustice in Crystal Mangum's case. They lack the courage to tackle the taboo topic of Mangum's injustice by even taking the simplest actions, such as writing a non-judgmental letter to the DHHS secretary to request a review of the medical examiner's autopsy report in Mangum's case. To begin with, Dr. Harr was timid about broaching with the senator a subject involving the Duke Lacrosse accuser, and at the faintest hint would have left from her office doorway had Miss Foushee indicated that she did not want to engage in dialogue about Mangum. Instead, she gave him cordial encouragement to stay in order to give time for security officers to arrive. Senator Foushee called for an emergency response from security not out of fear or intimidation, but for the purpose of discouraging Harr from coming onto the grounds of the General Assembly and the Legislative Office building. Senator Foushee's intent was to present Dr. Harr to the Capitol Police and security as a potential threat and as a person who should be on a watch list and under close surveillance while on the legislative campus. Senator Foushee's actions on September 8, 2021 were not only unwarranted but diabolically cruel and even racist. Dr. Harr's visits to the General Assembly over the past decade have been almost exclusively for the purpose of addressing a grievous injustice against Crystal Mangum and her continued incarceration despite evidence of her absolute innocence. Harr plans to continue visiting the legislators on legislative grounds until his objectives to have her freed and exonerated have been accomplished, although that process has now turned needlessly more complicated.